appreciate it. I appreciate you, mate. And thank you so much for taking the time out. And thank you to everyone for tuning in as well. If you got any questions that you come in as we go, then let me know. Otherwise, I'll get going with a presentation, and then we'll sort of spend a little bit of time on Q&A if there's any afterwards as well. If there isn't, that's absolutely cool. So Simba, can I just check that you can see my screen okay, and you got the slides up?
Yeah, you can see it.
Wicked. All right, let's get going. So thank you everyone for taking the time. Today I'm just going to speak about building communities that people care about and how to do it. And my hope is that by the end of the session, you'll have a working definition of what communities are, but also if you're going to do it yourself, how to do it yourself. So let's get going. And let's get going with a bit of context. So the year is 2021, and the word community is starting to feel dangerously close to being a buzzword. There's articles around the internet that look a little bit like this, eulogizing community-based marketing as the next big thing, the thing that's going to save your marketing funnel. It's enough to make you feel a little bit queasy. So let me be clear, this presentation is not a presentation about how community is going to be your next big acquisition tactic. Community is in fact a place where people come together to support one another, to be stronger than they would be alone, to connect in a meaningful way, to give first, and to build connections over the long term. Now, you may be looking at me and saying, well, you're a marketer, so why on earth would you bother to engage in community if there's not any money in it? Well, if Rory Sutherland's to be believed, then one of the joys of marketing, and something that I certainly subscribe to, is that part of marketing at the very least is about magic. And for me, there's nothing more magical than bringing people together and doing so in a meaningful way, which in turn creates opportunity. Opportunity really is the currency of community. Now, I've got a lot of slides in this presentation, and some of them I'm going to flick through, but I think it's worth dwelling on this one for just a moment and really emphasize about the word opportunity. If you're going to be starting a community and thinking that it's going to be the thing which drives 100 leads in the next 3 weeks, then you're going to be wrong. If you start a community and you think it's going to be my business in the next year, you're probably going to be wrong. You're probably going to struggle. What you will find, however, is that you will come across opportunities left, right, and center as a result of being at the center of a community and bringing together people in the most meaningful way possible. As an example, I'm sat here right now speaking to some lovely people that there was no way I would have been able to do if the community and the marketing meetup hadn't started. Opportunity really is the currency of community. Now, that's why you're going to do it. And this image may be lost on the American audience, but there was a program in the UK called How. And so let's focus on how you can build a community. There's a bit of an asterisk here, which is that the best advice that I've ever been given was by my dad, who said, the best advice is not to give advice. So instead, let me share with you a story of how the marketing meetup has grown over the past 4 years or 5 years into 24,000 engaged marketers. And let me emphasize that engagement really is the key metric there. I might speak about 24,000, but really the most important of those folks are those people who on a day-to-day level engage with the marketing meetup. And we're really lucky that a large core of our audience do that. And I'm going to speak about how to do that. My hope is that by the end of the talk, you're able to do it yourself. The way that we're going to approach it is in 3 acts. The first is an establishment of the marketing meetup. Then we speak about growing it, and finally about pivoting it. So act number 1, the identification of a problem. The year was 2014, and my wife and I had just moved into our first house together. In fact, just off to the edge of that photo there is where I'm sat right now. My wife is a scientist, and I took a job as a solo marketer working in a small company. Life was bliss. But as time progressed, 2 problems reared their ugly little head. The first problem was that I wanted to learn about marketing. The second was that I wanted to meet other marketers. The answer probably would have been traditional networking, walking into those rooms and introducing yourself to every person in there and saying, hey, I'm Joe Glover, I do this, blah, 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 blah. But that was enough to scare the bejesus out of me. That just wasn't a prospect which felt particularly appealing. The reason was threefold. The first was those tortoiseshell formations that people tended to find themselves in those networking rooms. It might feel like a long time ago that we were able to do that, but it was a time, there was a time where people had to walk into rooms and you had to sort of get into those little circles, and it was terrifying. The second was the corporate jargon that folks spent a lot of time speaking at these events, and even down to wearing a suit and tie, something that felt very foreign to me. And then finally was this feeling that when I walked into these rooms, I was going to be treated like a budget. I was going to be treated as a job title. And if neither of those things matched the people's expectations in front of me, they wouldn't spend the time of day to speak with me. Fundamentally, this meant that whenever I walked into one of those rooms, I felt a little bit like this. I was the guy hiding in the corner, not wanting to speak to anyone, a little bit terrified. But this felt like something worth combating. And so, summoning the courage that I could do from the pit of my stomach on a random train, the Cambridge Marketing Meetup was born, and something new entered the world. The Cambridge Marketing Meetup, its logo looked a little bit like this at the time, because that's all I could do in paint. At its core, the Marketing Meetup is a place where marketers can come to learn together, to connect, and do it all with kindness. And the way that looked on the first night was an event held at the Redgate Software Canteen with a buffet paid by 2 sponsors, 2 speakers, and 40 lovely people turned up. It looked a little bit like this, although that was a few months on. Almost immediately, the Hydra with its 3 heads was killed. And in its place, something new and exciting had entered. Now, I appreciate that you entered this talk today to actually hear about how to do things, not just to hear my story. So let's speak about the first act and the things that we can do off the basis of that story in the initial traction stage. So actually within that story, there are 5 key things that we've identified. A problem, we've done some market orientation, we've identified our target market, the messaging has been identified, and we've also identified some tactics for initial traction. Let's go through those quickly. So first thing, what was the problem? And I'd encourage you to think about the problem that you can solve for yourself. For me, I was a marketer who wanted to learn and connect in a nice place. So it was quite clear that was the problem that I needed to solve. To borrow Mark Ritzen's language, that was an element of orientation. I was understanding what the market wanted, although in this particular circumstances, I was orientating to my own need as the founder. This then informed the target market. So for me, the target market was marketers. For you, it's going to be something else. So it's worth establishing who your target market is up front. That started out very broad, but over the course of time, we narrowed things down. So it became marketing managers in companies of 1 to 20 people. They're interested in tactics. They know a little about a lot, but not a lot about a little. And most importantly, they are positive and lovely. Because we knew what the orientation was going to be, because we knew who the people we wanted to target were going to be, we were then able to establish a tone of voice very quick. And this is something I would encourage you to do once again. Know the tone of voice that you're going to use to speak to your community. For us, it was one of positivity, of informality, and it looked a little bit like this. So this is the description that is found on the Cambridge Marketing Meetup page, but it also appears on all the meetup.com pages. You can see some examples here. Positive and non-salesy, most informal and happy networking you will ever come across. Listening over selling. And anyone is welcome to come along, as long as you come to listen and are prepared to say hello and be positively lovely. Every one of these messages, reinforced over the course of 4 or 5 paragraphs, reinforces the type of people that we're going to get to come along, what we're going to do, and ultimately how people should behave. Fundamentally, this produced a culture that was reflective of the messaging and the tone of voice that we put out into the world. And then the marketing tactics. So we've done elements of orientation, we've done elements of strategy. Let's look at some tactics. So I use meetup.com, and this was 5 years ago, so it was a little while ago, and certainly in terms of marketing tactics, then the world has moved on quite a lot since then. However, one thing I would say is that if I was doing my time again and I was running events, I probably wouldn't use Meetup. I'd probably base things on Eventbrite because of the SEO benefits and also the discoverability. You may lose some of the benefits that meetup.com give you, but I'd say that as a platform right now, it's not in its hottest stage. So Eventbrite would be the way to go, unless you do take the time to develop signups on your own site, which is what we've now done in this latter stage of the marketing meetup. But at the beginning, you're only looking for something short, scrappy that you can implement straight away. So I'd say Eventbrite is a great place to start. We also got people to the events through other people's networks. So on the left here, you will see that this was one of the replies to one of the first messages that I sent anybody about the marketing meetup, who was a chap called Steve, who then represented a company called Brand Recruitment. I simply asked him whether they would cover the cost of the buffet and do a mail out to the whole community, their entire database about the marketing meetup starting. That was an opportunity to leverage Steve's audience, and in return, we offered him sponsorship. The same theory applied for Cambridge Marketing College, who were our other first sponsor. The important thing to note here is that by leveraging other people's networks, you shortcut your own process in building your own community. But the other thing to note is that every day I will now get a ton of people asking me to share stuff with my own community, but without any semblance of anything in return. And while I don't do things just for the return I'm going to get, it certainly helps if there's a clear value exchange. For them, it was going to be sponsorship. So we knew that we were going to put them in front of the audience. And the thought process there is what people will speak to the people that I'm going to want to bring together. The other thing that I did at the time was spend a lot of time on LinkedIn doing outreach to the very specific people that I could help. So you may not be able to see this entirely clearly, but this was a message which I sent, not automated. I sent it myself to in this case, a guy called Rishi, saying, look, I'm trying to get a useful, friendly community for London's marketers off the ground and hope you could be part of it. Let me know if I could send you a link. Right there, I gained permission to send them a link. And then once they said yes, I did. And then the relationship was formed. So in this particular case, Rishi would have been targeted because he was a head of marketing. And the follow-up to this email was if he said, you know what, I can't actually come to the event, my follow-up would have been, that's absolutely fine, but would you mind sharing with your team? So there's always an opportunity when you're doing cold outreach to actually spend a little bit of time getting a bit of word of mouth driven too. Something that's really important at this stage to emphasize is that we moved away from meetup.com, particularly because we didn't own any of the data of the people in the community. Now, I don't like speaking about like ownership of data or whatever, but you know, Meetup did not give us access to any data. So when you're considering platforms to base your communities on, make sure that you have access to the data. This becomes really important, as is the case with meetup.com right now, where because it's not as popular as it used to be, if we had our entire community in meetup.com, the marketing meetup wouldn't be here today. It was only because we spent a little bit of time generating an email database that we were able to continue and pivot in the times where meetup.com wasn't doing quite as well. So what you can see here is over the course of this Act 1, we've in effect built something that starts to look a little bit like a marketing strategy in a way. And that's the way I think. But problem is started at the top. We've got a target market, we've got some clear messages, and then we've got some tactics to get the word out. Now, I will send these to Simbar afterwards as well. So you've got some little notes on questions that you can be asking yourself when you're looking to establish your own community to see if you're able to sort of kickstart your own community journey. But let's get on to Act 2. So Act 2 takes us between 2016 and 2020. And this is the lessons from growing a community. So we've established it, we've got that initial traction, we've held our first event, the initial Hydra has been killed, and now we're on to growing the community. It was in this stage that we felt a little bit like champions, and hopefully this makes Simba smile, because it makes me smile. It was a long time ago that this happened, but it makes me happy. And when we felt like champions, the community just kept on growing and growing and growing, and evolving and evolving and evolving. So there's actually 5 things about growing that I want to touch on at this stage, not 4. So the first is culture. So at every event that the Marketing Meetup ran, we reinforced these 3 values: listen, say hello, and be positively lovely. Now, the interesting thing about this is that when we went out to the community and said these 3 values, the thing that we heard back on a regular basis were these 2 words: positively lovely. Now, I spoke with a few American friends about the words positively lovely, and they've told me that it's the most British phrase they've heard in their entire life. And that may be true, but it's also really, really important, because positively lovely eked its way into the DNA of everything we do at the Marketing Meetup. And as much as we put out the words positively lovely into the community, we started to hear it back. We created the most positively lovely echo chamber in the entire world. And the way that we did that was that we started to act positively lovely. So to give some examples, we didn't take any, so all Marketing Meetup events were free to attend. However, we often gave people the option to give a charitable donation in lieu of a ticketing fee. So over the course of a few years, we were able to raise many thousands of pounds for charities. Another example was one day, every attendee who came to the Marketing Meetup, and bearing in mind that this was a free event, we greeted them with a £1 coin. And we said, here you go, here's £1. We didn't tell them why. And then it was only about 15 minutes later that we actually sort of revealed the reason why. And that £1 was to be used for the benefit of making someone else's day. And that was it. You know, it was free money to go and make someone else's day. The types of comments that we got back in return were like things like, who does that? You know, who gives people money to go and make other people's day? But it was amazing. And what was amazing about it was that the next day I got like 40, 50, 60 tweets or whatever from people saying, I've used that £1 to go and make someone else's day, and this is how I did it. And that's impact right there. Community, when done well, makes an impact not just within the community, but also the surrounding circles around it. Fundamentally, and I think this speaks to great marketing as much as a great community, nobody really cares about the grey space in the middle. So it's your objective to either get people to really hate you or really, really love you. And I'd really recommend the latter of the 2 of those things. And the only way that you get people to love you is by putting as much love into the community as you want back. So like, I really cannot emphasize enough, if your heart is not in building a community, then you're not going to succeed, because it requires a genuine and sincere amount of love. Fundamentally, the culture of being positively lovely also seeped into our branding as well. So you can see right now that on our website, we've taken the inspiration from Positively Lovely and popped that in the header of our website. And now it's something that we use everywhere. In fact, it's in the bottom left of my slides, Positively Lovely webinars as an example. Second, growing. So there were a bunch of lovely, lovely people, and Duncan being one of them who was watching here. He isn't on this slide, but he was one of those lovely people who helped grow the Marketing Meetup. So I am just one person. I am flawed in the same way as everyone else. I also have a limited amount of time, and with a 12-week-old baby at home, then there's no way that I'll be able to travel in the same way as I used to. So the way the Marketing Meetup community grows is through the help of other people too, who almost uniformly ask this question: can I do this event closer to my house? As someone who was making it up as I went along, I very happily said yes. And lo and behold, over the course of the first 4 years of the marketing meetup journey, we went from one location to 14 very, very quickly, which never would have been possible without other people. Another example is that this guy, so this is Baz, which is the most wonderful name. Baz was actually the guy who came up with our branding, which was well beyond the capabilities of me. The point here is that you can't do these things alone. And whether it's resource or talent, there are people out there who can do things better than you, or can even just do things that you can't. And you're going to have to rely on them. So if you're building a community and you really mean it, make sure that you're spending time looking out for people to help you build it too. And that's the final, last, most important thing about other people is word of mouth is how communities grow. You can put all the acquisition ads that you want out there in the world and stuff like that, but the ROI is going to be terrible because all they're going to be doing is turning up and having a nice time and supporting each other and making people stronger. But in terms of like an acquisition channel, community is not going to be your one. So I'd really encourage you on a tactical level to actually spend some time asking people to spread the word about your community and saying, you know what, like we're doing this amazing thing, we're doing it for you. Would you mind sharing the word about it? Third lesson from here is some mistakes. So you will make some along your way. I won't bore you with a huge story at this stage, but needless to say, a couple of the moments where the marketing meetup community has gone slightly awry, the only thing that has ever got me out of it is honesty and holding my hands up and saying, you know what, we're trying our best. So, you know, I'm really sorry, let's move on, or let's see what we can do to rectify the situation. Community is at its core a human experience. So there's no hiding behind corporate speak. There's no kind regards. There's no yours sincerely. It's, hey, I'm Joe. I'm turning up. I'm doing my best for you. And let's make this special together. Fourth lesson about growing a community is about finding purpose. So I will confess that there was probably a period about 3.5 years into growing the marketing meetup where I was driving home on a dark night. I was about an hour and a half away from home. I was by myself. I was still working full time at this point. I wasn't full time on the marketing meetup. And I found myself questioning, why am I doing this free event? Why am I running this thing for the benefit of other people? It was in that moment that it caused me to reflect on my own purpose for the marketing meetup and how I could go about making sure that I'm doing a better job. It took me a moment of sort of clarity to realize that the thing that I really loved and really enjoyed more than any other thing in life is helping people. And it was in that moment that I realized that the reason why the marketing meetup will continue being a success is that we just need to keep on helping people in the most meaningful way. If your purpose is just money, you're not going to get the most that you need out of community because it is truly a labor of love. And those opportunities aren't always clear that they're the most clear opportunities when we come back to speaking about opportunity being the currency of community. And then finally, a word on metrics. So I've spent a remarkably small amount of time actually looking at the metrics of the marketing meetup. The one that I really, really care about, however, is those moments of impact, those moments where people get in touch, where they say, you know what, Joe, you've made a real difference in my life. Frankly, that's the only metric that matters in community. If you're reporting on community size, etc., I wouldn't spend so much time on the big numbers. What I would actually recommend is spending some time understanding how engaged people are and the impact that you're making in their life. So we were in a happy place come the beginning of 2020. The Hydra had been slayed, but what we didn't realize was there was another mountain to climb. Let's just reflect very quickly on the messages from growing a community though. First, make sure you're choosing a culture. Secondly, make people's toes curl with your tone of voice. There are some people who will hate what you're doing, but if they hate it, it means that there's some on the other side who absolutely love it. And the only people who matter are the people who you have built your community for. You're not alone, and make sure you find people around it, but make sure you also stick at community. For me, the most useful mindset to have when building a community, because it is a long-term investment, is to have a 30-month mindset. That is to commit to a minimum of 30 months to make sure that you're giving your all for the duration of those 30 months. If things still don't turn out all right, then maybe it wasn't to be. But 30 months is just short of 3 years. It's 2.5 years. And if nothing's happened after 2.5 years, you can throw in the towel. Most people quit far, far earlier. If we were doing this as a purely commercial venture, the marketing meetup would have quitted far, far earlier. But 30 months, give it that amount of time. And I guarantee you'll have a proper answer as to whether you tried hard enough or not. When you bring in other people, make sure you have assets in order and make sure you also write an agreement. One of the things that I have found and struggled with building the marketing meetup is giving clarity to those people who came in and said, you know what, I'd like to help on this community. The important things here are just to make sure that there's a clear contract and agreement. I know that sounds formal, but it doesn't need to be. It protects both of you. And also just make sure you got stuff like assets so people can access logos and stuff like that. It just makes life so much easier. Make sure that you're aware that mistakes happen, because they always do, and that you've identified your purpose for doing why you're doing what you're doing. Again, I want to make sure that this is about you. So here's some questions that you can ask yourself. And again, they'll be provided at the end, which will give you a place where you can go in and see and ask yourself these questions about building your own community. So act number 3, the final boss emerges, pivoting the marketing meetup. So at the beginning of 2020, we were running 140 events in a year, and we just started in New York too. Little did I realize that in the next cave, there was a deadly final boss. I remember on March the 13th, 2020, having to cancel every one of my events like that. On that day, I sent a video from this office that said, look, we're going to have to do this. And I felt a little bit like this. I felt terrified. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't have any other income other than the marketing meetup. 140 events were due that year. There was 4 years of hard work put into that community, into building that safe space for marketers to come together. But it was during that period that I also realized that the way I've been thinking about the community was a little bit wrong. It wasn't 140 events. I wasn't an events company. The marketing meetup was this word that we've been using a lot, a community. And when you start to think of things as a community, as a foundation, then you start to realize that it doesn't actually matter what you do. What matters is that you're doing it for the community. So rather than that top level reading events company, that top level reads community, and everything else is informed after that point. So for example, our community runs webinars, has the newsletter, has the podcast and the Facebook group, but we're not an events company, we're a community. And fundamentally, that means, that we've got that foundation of love, kindness, and humanity that sort of underwrites that as well. With that thought in mind, I once again summoned the courage that I could, despite feeling upset, and spent a weekend emailing the world's most famous marketers. And that email looked a little bit like this. So, hey, Mark, we met briefly. I organize marketing events. Rather than mope about, I'm determined to create the best live streams possible for the community. 20 to 30 minutes with some of the world's greatest minds. I really consider you to be in that bracket. And then this paragraph at the end, there are a lot of scared people out there right now. And even though marketing talks won't solve it, I think a bit of normality and something special will give them something to look forward to. So right there and then, we gave Mark Ritson the opportunity to join something quite special. And you know what? He did, which was amazing. And right there and then, we got an unbelievable sense of momentum behind our community once more, just this time in a virtual space. Of course, some were harder, but we were able to announce a schedule very early on that looked unbelievable, with the likes of Ram Fishkin, Mark Ritson, Dave Gerhardt, and so many more. The important thing to remember about this stage of the community, however, was that if you remember the world in 2020, around March time, there was a lot of scared people around there. People were worried about losing their businesses. They were worried about getting sick. And fundamentally, this also played into the role of the community. Rather than being bothered about marketing in that moment, we went back to the most important thing, which is about humanity. This was an email that we sent on probably the week after the marketing meetup cancelled all our events, which was very, very simply, hi there, are you okay? This email went out to many, many thousands of people, and it came with the promise that we would pick up every reply that came from folks. And you know what? We got like 200 replies that day. So I spent the majority of my day either making videos or emails to folks just saying, are you all right? And, you know, if there's anything we can do to support you. Fundamentally, that spoke to the spirit of community, because as much as we want to focus on the business that can come about as a result of a community, the most important part of all this is a human experience. That's what it's all about. And even though this coronavirus has been nasty and horrible and still remains so, and we can't underplay the impact of it on our world, there are moments of joy to be had with that, because every human experience also has moments of joy. So one example was that, I won't play it now, but we got, you know, at the time where people were like, every company was doing the "we're there for you" message. Well, we got Sean Paul to do ours for us, which was amazing. And like, we sent it out in an email, and like, people went mental for it. And it was just a bit of levity in a time where there was otherwise very little.
Bless them and there ain't no stress.
It was amazing. So what can we learn? Fundamentally, never forget what community is about. It's our role to bring people together and do so meaningfully. Now, if we were looking at the hero's journey, people could say, you know, that we're a lot further than we are. But really, right now, it feels like we're at the beginning of this journey. We're still going on an adventure. We're still figuring out our world. Today, the community looks like this. It's actually about 24,000 people. But the most important thing is the future seems bright. So let's reflect on some of the questions that I've asked over the duration of this talk. First of all, Act 1, the initial traction stage. What problem are you looking to solve? Who are the people? What messages? Are you able to provide genuine value to other communities? And how can you future-proof the community? All really important questions. Act 2, in the growth stage, what culture do you want to promote? How can you communicate uniquely? Is your tone of voice differentiated in the market? Who can help you grow? And do you have the time, the 30 months, and the backing to grow your community? And finally, Act 3, never forget what community is about. At the end of the day, it's a human experience. We're here to support one another. And it's really not much more complicated than that. So that's my talk done. So thank you all so much for taking the time. I hope that's been useful. I can see that there's a few open questions, although I haven't read them. So hopefully that's been useful. And yeah, let me know.
Yeah, I I enjoyed it. It was so useful. I was just laughing at Khalid, like that picture you used of Manchester. He's a big Liverpool fan, so it was.
I didn't mean to do that on purpose, but I'm happy it happened.
Okay, I think we have like a few questions. Like the first one is from Ian. He says, he Eventbrite versus Luma. Any thoughts when starting out?
I don't actually know Luma, so that's an interesting one for me. So for me, I'm now looking at Luma right now, and I can see that right at the top it says activate your community, which seems like an interesting thing. I would say that for me, the tactics is actually the least important part of all of this in a way, so I would definitely put like Eventbrite, meetup.com, Luma, from what I can tell, as tactics. They're right at the very end, and they're almost, I don't want to say they're unimportant because they're not, but the most important thing is knowing the reason why you're doing it, the people that you're going to help, the messages that you're going to put out. And then finally, the bit at the end is about like how you actually get the word out. And like, so in this instances, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Eventbrite for me is far more event-based, and it seems like Luma is more community-based. So in that case, you could probably make a implication that Luma might be better. But I think the most important thing about these platforms is that meetup.com gave a real advantage in the first instance because people were using it. So, I didn't have to work too hard to get that first 100 people beyond my cold outreach because people were already using the meetup.com platform. So my only lesson on tactics at that stage would be not to gravitate towards the shiny thing that's like new, but actually go to the place where people are, because that's the most important thing, really. I think that's probably the stuff that really matters.
Nice. We have another question from Duncan. He was asking, is tone of voice and tone of brand enough to get the sort of people you want and not folks you wouldn't want to come?
Good question. So I'm just going to have to manually adjust my exposure on my camera. So let me do that. So yes, I would say that tone of voice and tone of brand have been remarkably successful at driving exactly the right people that we want to our community. I would say that if you look through the webinar signups for the marketing meetup, almost exclusively, and I'd say like literally 1 or 2% of people are outside of our target market. The rest of folks are almost bang on. I would say that clarity in terms of messaging and tone of voice is brilliant. And I'd also suggest that for folks you don't want in the community, they tend to self-select out of the community fairly sharpish. So in the middle of the talk there, I made a quote which was make people's toes curl. And so that was actually from a former community member who used to get our newsletter and said that he couldn't stand the tone of voice that I used to put out in my emails. And like, that made me so happy, because like that person had chosen they'd self-selected to not get involved in our community because they didn't like the tone of voice. And that's absolutely okay, because there's 24,000 people out there who do. So I'd say that it's remarkably successful and it's almost surprising how effective it is, but it definitely is. I think Duncan's second half of the question was like, how do you put off people who wouldn't buy into the community or will cause friction with the goals? And so like, there will be inevitably some people who sort of slip through the net, find themselves in the room, be it virtual or physical, with your community. And they do cause that friction, but generally speaking, they don't come back. And there's almost, I think generally speaking, people don't take it too personally if there's one person who doesn't fit it in the room. But if you find yourself in a room where it's full of people who you didn't want to help, then I would go back to that tone of voice and say, well, actually, we need to reevaluate here because there's something going wrong.
Okay. And then the other one is from Ewa. What's next to come for the marketing meetup community, and what are your personal plans for 2021?
So what's next to come? So we're launching the Marketing Meetup Plus presently. So something that people came to me quite regularly with was a question about what's the best marketing course, or I'm fairly new to marketing, where can I go to learn a general sort of marketing overview? And my answer was usually the same one as everyone else. You can go to the CIM and places like that, but it wasn't a perfect answer to the question that they were asking. And so we built it. We've built what we're coining the Netflix for marketers. This is a place where people comes together and can learn from short videos. We've got about 100 videos sat in the database right now. And launching that as a subscription is a huge thing for the marketing meetup. In terms of my personal plans, I'd like to do a lot more speaking. I'd like to write a book. So hopefully that will happen too. I'll just keep on making it up, really. I think something I've learned over this course of time, and I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but it certainly feels right in my gut, is that planning things too much sort of restricts things. So I'm trying to do my best to sort of go with the flow a little bit. You know, we've got our 12-week-old daughter at home, 12-week-old daughter at home too, which is a huge change in our lives too. So focusing on the most important things, really.
Okay. And the next question is from Khalid. He says, would you look if they are already pre-existing community, or would you look to create one for your own? I see that competitors have a community, but I might not want to contribute to growing it.
It's a really good point. So I would say if the other people's community is solving the problem that you would like to solve, then join theirs, you know, because there's no point in reinventing the wheel. However, what I would say is that there's points of differentiation to be had between not only what they're doing, but how they're doing it. So for example, with the marketing meetup, there are plenty of marketing communities out there in the world, but I don't think there's many out there who prioritize kindness in the same way as we do. That's our point of defensibility. That's our point of like, you know what, that's what makes us a little bit special. So if you have a point of view about a community that is different to what already exists out there, then you've got an opportunity to create something special, to commit something new. However, I would say that if you know, someone is doing exactly what you want to be doing, then there's no point. It's okay to join other people's, because like end of the day, it's hard work. It's really, really hard work. So it's okay to join other people's communities for sure.
Okay, the next question again is from Khalid. He says, thoughts on virtual versus physical community?
So I've been surprised about the value of virtual communities. So there's some definite pros and cons. So the pros for virtual is that over the past year, our community has grown from somewhere in the region of 11,000 to about 24,000 people on the basis of no longer having our geographic restriction on the events that we run. Like people can join from California, from Egypt, from Macedonia, from Greece, from Russia, wherever it is, they can join our events, which is incredible. And that's given a great diversity to the group. It's given a lot more ideas. The community feels, in a way, more connected. Even though we're all joined at home, we're going through a unique experience together. So folks have been able to join and create something special together over this past year. So I think there's a definite pro there. I think the well-recognized con is that moment of serendipity that is lost, that sort of bumping into someone or seeing someone across the room that you'd love to speak to, and sort of having that moment of interaction. The counter to that, however, I would say is that I've been really pleased and surprised about how effective the chat feature is during events. Like one thing that we do whenever we run events is really encourage people to use that chat feature because it's a genuine source of connection. And we've had people in our events find each other jobs and, you know, like suggest books and stuff like that all the time while talks are going on. So, you know, I can see that like here, there was like a comment about like Man United or something like that. And like, you know, somebody would have been thinking that during a talk, but they wouldn't have necessarily said it while the talk was going on, but they've had the ability to use it in the chat feature right there. So I'd say that, you know, like that's a real benefit of the virtual community. And so that's, so yeah, that's definitely worth looking into.
Okay, the next one is from Angle Point. I think you touched on that, but let me just read it out. You talked about Americans as part of your community that had much more physical presence in the UK. how have you built the community overseas?
It's an interesting question because it's probably not something I've given a significant amount of thought to. So I would say that a lot of the messaging that the marketing meetup has put out over the course of time, I haven't, rightly or wrongly, I don't know whether this is a good answer or really terrible advice, but I haven't spent a lot of time sort of adapting the messaging to different geographies or whatever. I've definitely relied on people self-selecting into the group to say that this is a tone of voice and this is a message that resonates with me. And whether they're in the USA or Egypt or wherever it is, folks have chosen to self-select within to that group. So that's been really, really great. One thing that I was mindful of when we ran our first physical event in New York was this message of positively lovely. I thought there's no way that's going to resonate, because the impression that I had, actually quite wrongly, was that the American community was going to be a lot more commercially focused. So when I went in and told people to be positively lovely to one another, they were going to be like, what the hell is that? I'm not interested. You know, what is that rubbish? But I tell you, by the end of that night, like, you've never heard more American people, in my experience, say the word lovely. You know, it was something that they'd chosen to resonate with, chosen to interact with. And for that reason, we were able to build a community around the same messages that we had had before. So I would say there have been a brand new set of opportunities brought about by the virtual world. But for me, at least, there hasn't been a great amount of differentiation that has needed to be made based on geography, because the world is that little bit smaller right now.
Okay. Before I read the other, I have a question myself. What's the best way to frame like a community, a brand community? Do you think it has to be framed as a marketing strategy or as a business strategy?
I didn't understand.
It depends. Sorry, that was my Google Home going off.
Sure. Okay.
I don't think so. I think within, so are you talking within a corporate context? So
Yeah.
within business?
For instance, maybe for a B2B brand,
Yeah.
should we frame their community as a marketing strategy or as a business strategy?
I think it's a really good question, and I think you can do it in one of two ways. So if you were to frame it as a marketing strategy, you would be looking at it as a top of funnel exercise. Probably you'd be spending a lot of time investing in people, looking at, you know, the interaction that people are having with the group. You may look at things like clicks to site, but attributing is always going to be very, very difficult. So, you know, attributing someone in the community to a purchase is going to be quite difficult. So from a marketing perspective, sort of creating that situation where you're justifying your actions based on ROI is going to be quite difficult. If it's a marketing team initiative as well. As a business initiative, the assumption is that you would have like a CEO, a founder, or etc. on board with the theory, and they are as involved in the creation and as involved emotionally in the creation and sustenance of this community too. So for that reason, and I'm thinking out loud at the same time as I'm speaking, it seems like there's a real benefit to having the whole business on board with the sense of community, because then you're also starting to build a culture within your company as much as you are a culture within the community that you're developing. So I can see benefits for both, but if I was to have a preference out of the two, I'd be hoping that my founder is saying to me, you know, we need to build a community, not for the benefit of a pipeline or anything like that, but that's the kind of company that we want to be. And that feels like a far stronger sort of proposition when it comes to selling community internally. Because as I say, the currency of community is opportunity. It's not necessarily sort of dollars on a P&L.
Okay, nice. And then Khalid says, what is the best book or podcast on creating a community?
I don't know. I'll write it and then I'll tell you. But I haven't seen any personally. That doesn't mean to say that they aren't out there, but I just haven't read any. Yeah. Well, thank you. There's already some feedback in the chat there that people would
Yeah.
either buy it or so yeah, I'll do that. I mean, if there's a market for it, I guess that's the only thing. But yeah, I'd like to do that. So maybe I'll do that one day.
Okay, I think this might be the last question from, yeah, it's from Duncan. He says, do you find there's an optimum level of input from you required to keep the community talking, e.g. weekly events or emails?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So if we think about the definition of a community, then really in the most useful sense, then it shouldn't be a broadcast. So folks, you shouldn't be just sending out messages to the community and saying, you know what, here's a message, digest this and wait for me to come back with another message. A really great community will actually take the time to sort of interact with each other beyond those broadcasts. What Duncan's asking there, though, is a really, really good question in terms of if there's an optimal level of effort. And it's probably on a bit of a downward slope, which means to say at the very beginning, your engagement is going to have to be, every day, almost every hour, sort of engaging with the community, prompting that engagement over the course of time. However, what you'll see as time progresses is that people will spend more time engaging with the community just on the basis of the other interaction that's gone on. And over the course of time, it decreases. So I'd say the optimal level of input probably depends on the stage and time and age of your community. But what I would also say is it's always good to keep that activity ongoing on a consistent basis. So for the marketing meetup, we hold weekly events. We have certain posts that go into our Facebook group on a regular basis. And all these things are sort of regular and do indeed prompt engagement. So yeah, it decreases over time, but it's definitely a beneficial thing to do. Expect to do a lot of it at the beginning.
Okay, nice. It seems like everyone in the chat wants to buy your book.
That's kind. They're lovely people.
So one last question from Hamid. He said, should we aim to shine individually in a community? Or what's your take on that?
So I think inevitably there are going to be some folks who contribute more in any community. So there's going to be a core of individuals who engage more.
He is talking about like being an opinion leader or stuff like that within a community.
I don't see any problem with that. The only thing I would say is it has to be done the right way, and the way to do it is with a giving attitude first.
Yeah.
So any individual who wishes to contribute more has to be done in the sense of, out you go, here's some things that I learned, here's some writing that I've done, here's some things that I think will genuinely help you. I don't think any of it can be done with a selfish intent, because I think it can sort of be seen through very, very quickly. But if you want to be an active member of the community for the most genuine of reasons, that's wonderful. And like community engagements, community organizers would thank you. So yeah, look to help people, and there's really no reason why you shouldn't want to shine in the community. I think it's a great thing if you want to elevate other human beings through your contributions.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I personally think that communities are strongest when like everyone plays a role.
Absolutely.
Like it's not about who knows what, but it's all about like maybe helping each other out.
Exactly. That's a much better answer than what I gave. So yeah, go with your advice.
Okay, so I think that was the last question. So where can people find you?
So folks can go to themarketingmeetup.com. They can attend our events, which happen on a weekly basis. You can listen to our podcast. They can get our newsletter. They can join the Facebook group. There's many opportunities to engage.
The name of your Facebook group, is it marketing?
It's just the Marketing Meetup in Facebook, and then you join the group, not the page. So there's a page which is also called the Marketing Meetup, but it's the group that you want to join, and that's a closed group. I think there's about 2,500 people in there, and to the point about Duncan making about like regular posting and stuff like that, we're now at the stage where a lot of people will sort of be posting themselves and asking questions and stuff like that, which is really lovely to see.
Okay, sure. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much for taking your time.
Not at all, man. Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone for watching. It's no small thing to spend time and watch these things. So I appreciate everyone for taking the time. And if they have any questions, then get in touch. Absolutely, no problem with that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll be sending out like the recording and the slides maybe probably on Friday.
Great.
So yeah.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you. And thank you for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Not at all, man. Thank you for asking. I hope you have a lovely day, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.